biology, the individual, society. It brings in bigger ideas that we maybe need to look to philosophy or social theory to help us sort of come to terms with. And what I'm looking at here is Axel Honneth's idea of recognition. And I'm going to counterpose that with the American philosopher Nancy Fraser's idea of redistribution and look at the debate between the two. But I think for social work, we need something to ground it. And as I suggested earlier, I'm going to look at Kathleen Lynch's work on affective equality. Okay, so if you could move on, Sarah. Just briefly, I don't know how many people know of Honneth's idea of recognition. I know that a number of people are interested. Certainly I'm involved with a couple of academics at the University of Edinburgh in a European network looking at the idea of recognition. But basically, it was proposed by Axel Honneth, who's one of the Frankfurt School of Social Theory. And the Frankfurt School has thrown up some of the really big hitters in social thinking over the 20th century. So guys like Jürgen Habermas. And Honneth's one of those big thinkers. And in 1995, he proposed his theory of recognition. And he identifies 3 pillars of recognition: love, rights, and solidarity. As I say, there's growing interest in Honneth's work. But I think that to understand Honneth, you need to go back to the influence that Hegel has on him. And I don't know, again, how much people know about Hegel, but I can remember from my undergraduate days where I did a history degree, the idea of the Hegelian dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you propose one argument, you counterpose it with another, and then you find some way forward, some synthesis that sort of is a middle way. So that's, I think, an underpinning idea behind Honneth's work. So the pillars of recognition don't exist as abstracts, but are to be negotiated in the social sphere. You know, you've got to propose one idea, counterpose that, and then try and negotiate a way forward. So I think if you think about that, that explains or helps explain how Honneth understands recognition. Okay, next slide, Sarah. Okay. 3 pillars of recognition: love, rights, solidarity. If I start with love, it refers to the sort of multiple sources or multiple connections between a small number of people. So for most people, that happens in a family sort of setting. Honneth draws, I think, a bit on attachment theory, but it's more rooted in Winnicott's idea of good enough parenting, which most social workers will have heard about. So it's rooted in everyday experience rather than a sort of clinical sort of setting. The quality of love or recognition allows a child to learn that they exist and they matter. This idea of mattering, I think, is a really important one for social workers. Again, something that I'm sort of developing elsewhere. They exist and they matter separate from other people. Through this, they become aware of their own uniqueness and abilities and can develop a positive image and resultant self-confidence. So love helps us develop self-confidence. And it emerges out of this process of mutual recognition. It's a social process. You can't just demand love. That's one of my concerns when I hear demands from kids that they want to be loved, they demand to be loved. I think we really need to be open to ideas that love can emerge from caring relationships, but it can't be demanded. It's something that really has to emerge through negotiation and through intersubjective processes. Okay, so if we move to the next pillar, which is rights. I think Honneth's idea of rights is more sophisticated than some of the legalistic and contractual ideas about rights that frame so much policy discourse. And Patchy, the Minister, those that are applied to some of the big ticket items, such as the National Care Service. I think rights obviously have a place to play in the National Care Service, but we also, I think, need to understand how people might attain those rights. So Honneth says that you really need to have experienced love before you can claim rights. That it becomes that the experience of being loved is a prerequisite to becoming a bearer of rights. then capable of taking it to the next stage of solidarity, of participation in the public sphere. So the experience of love developed in the family enables an individual to view him or herself as a subject with dignity and moral worth. It's this basis of self-confidence, rights become realisable in the process of an individual striving for self-respect. So the experience of love allows the development of self-confidence. The experience of rights allows the development of self-respect. And it's only in this process of struggle and negotiation within a wider community that an individual is able to avail of codified ideas of rights or versions of rights. So just to say that you have rights, if you don't have this sort of wherewithal to be able to claim them, starts to become a bit problematic potentially. So again, as with love, legal rights are not sufficient in facilitating public participation in the public sphere. Rights as love can't be demanded. So if we move towards this public sphere and the idea of solidarity, that an ethical life is the basis for mutual esteem and shared values. Self-esteem is built on the respect one receives in the public sphere for what one does. So if you've experienced love, if you can claim rights, then you can actually contribute and be valued, feel valued within the public sphere. So that helps to build pride and competence. And ultimately this leads to self-esteem. So again, self-confidence built through love, self-respect built through rights, and self-esteem built through this ability, this capacity to engage within the public sphere. Okay, next slide, Sarah. The converse of recognition for Honneth is disrespect, and he has a book on disrespect from 2014, and that emerges when there's a misrecognition or an unequal distribution of recognition. And the example I give there, or denial of rights, self-respect. If you think about some of the people that social workers work with, such as problem drug users, then they struggle to actually find a place for themselves within wider society. They don't feel respected, they feel disrespected within those settings. Parents who have lost kids or had kids taken off them, they don't feel respected necessarily. Okay, just on a more positive note, Honneth suggests that actually that experience of recognition can also be a prompt to actually do something about it, to struggle against economic and cultural injustice. Okay, next slide, Sarah. A number of critiques of Honneth. The major one comes from Nancy Fraser, who basically says that that Honneth deals too much with the intersubjective, with the individual, doesn't take into account the structural sort of determinants of the ability to be respected, if you like, and argues for redistribution of resources as a prerequisite for respect. And of course, she's got a point, in the current climate where we see the gap between rich and poor increasing all the time, and the consequent impact of that in terms of the idea of this Wilkinson Pickett's idea of the spirit level, that inequality is damaging to everyone. But it has material consequences when someone, resources are insufficient to meet their basic needs, and in a climate of austerity, relationships are strained with consequent difficulties in experiencing the pillars of recognition. It's easier to be recognised within a family which is not struggling with structural and economic disadvantage. So Fraser asserts three conditions of social justice: the equalisation of resources, respect, and representation. Other critiques of Honneth, which is the next slide, Sarah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to skip over this because it maybe takes us down a slightly different sort of route. But basically, one of the critiques of Honneth is that he looks at or his ideas can be associated with the emergence of identity politics rather than class politics. So a proliferation, according to Nancy Fraser, you end up with a proliferation of identities, each fighting one another for recognition, which encourages separatism and group enclaves. It focuses on what divides rather than on this idea of solidarity. But again, that's perhaps a sort of side issue. But basically, you've got Fraser calling for redistribution as a prerequisite for recognition, and O'Honeth arguing that recognition should bring about redistribution. If you respect people, then you won't sort of tolerate the kind of inequality, structural inequalities that we currently see. So that's the essence of the big debate in social policy between O'Honeth and Fraser. And I want to suggest that that is all very well, but it can be a wee bit abstract, a wee bit grand for social work. So I want to move on and ground it in social work. And for that, I really look to Kathleen Lynch's work. Kathleen Lynch was Professor in the Equalities Unit at University College Dublin. And she wrote a book, I think, back in 2009 around this idea of effective equality, the fact that we need some equality of, how we enjoy each other's company, how we like one another, how we actually get along with one another. So she argues that there's something missing from Fraser's schema of redistribution, respect and relationship. And what is missing, she would claim, is the relational element. She makes a case for debates around equality to include a dimension of effective or relational equality. And how she describes that is the doing and receiving of love, care and solidarity. You'll see there that she actually substitutes rights for care, and again that's a wider debate around in the care ethics literature. Care ethics would suggest that we need to look to care rather than rights. But again, I'm not going to go down that track here. So effective inequality occurs when people are deprived of the love, care and solidarity they need to survive and flourish as human beings. This produces negative outcomes: fear, a sense of being unloved, and unwanted, anxiety, and poor health. The next slide, Suna. But this idea of effective equality is not fluffy. It involves a lot of hard work, physical, mental, emotional. I'm sort of inclined to go towards a social pedagogic idea of head, heart, and hands. It involves social workers getting involved at a number of levels with those that they're working with. It takes time, competence, energy, and can be both a burden and a pleasure. It's largely dispositional and generated in intentions and feelings for others. It's uniquely personal. So in that sense, it's inseparable from the caregiver. You can't just offer care, because care is something which is reciprocal. It's something which is experienced within the caring relationship. So you can't bring in somebody else to do that same nature of care without altering the nature of that caring relationship. So once you see care as a commodity to be parceled into time slots or shift systems, you actually compromise the very nature of care. So love, care, solidarity involves affirming, supporting and challenging, as well as identifying with someone and supporting them emotionally in times of distress. And it might involve going beyond what has come to be seen as professional in the caring professions. Okay, next slide, Suna. I just want to offer a wee personal reflection here. My family and I have been long-term respite carers for disabled kids for almost 30 years. And when the Dubs agreement was struck and asylum seekers were being brought to the UK, to Scotland, the local authority that we live in asked us if we would extend our remit to take a asylum seeking kid. So we took a 16-year-old young man. I've called him Faisal here. And he came to us. A number of his other friends who had come with him, who were from the same country, city, ended up in group homes. Now, as a former residential worker, I'm not going to sort of argue the merits of foster versus residential care, but I think the nature of the settlement that the local authorities got was the same. So there was a equality of distribution, if you like, distribution of resource. But Faisal has done much better. Part of that is to do with his own capacity, his own ability. But I think some of it was to do with an experience of love, which has grown out through the continuity of daily living and in the practical and effective practices that he sort of encountered living with us. But part of what he encountered there was access to social capital, to us being able to introduce him to people, to push them to speak to the right people about access to college, to university, about access to playing football, doing everyday things, to access to the social sphere, if you like. So we were able to sort of help him negotiate that access. And that's allowed his self-confidence to grow, has provided a basis for the negotiation of rights and for the recognition of achievements in the public sphere, such as success in school and now university, and actually now working for the Scottish Government in an internship. But he also is able to sort of assert himself in that public sphere by taking a political stance in respect of the situation in his country of origin. So again, just a personal reflection which has informed some of my thinking on these bigger themes. So the next slide and the final slide, Sarah. Just a quote from Jonathan Hearn, who's a professor at Edinburgh University, and he suggests that any programme of social welfare will ultimately have to grapple not just with the rational design of society. It's not just malfunctions of economic and political systems that underlie chronic maldistributions of social power and opportunity. From the perspectives of Hume Smith, these also need to lie in our hearts. So yeah, we need the structures, but we also actually need the emotional sort of roots of the, which will actually give life to these structures. We need the relational sort of basis of the kind of policy that we want to take forward. So that's me.
Thanks very much, Mark. I think that's probably given people lots to think about. And thank you for the references there. I think they're really useful. We've got people asking for the slides. And just to say, all slides will be sent out to everybody after the event. Thank you so much. We'll move on now. Laura Lamb, who's the Acting Director of Workforce at the SSC, who's going to talk to us about the BASW Codes of Ethics within the SSC Codes of Practice. Before joining the SSC, Laura was a local authority social worker in child and adolescent mental health services. In 2008, she joined the SSC and has held a range of roles within fitness to practice and was appointed Head of Learning and Development in 2018. Her interests in her current role, she's Acting Director of Workforce Education and Standards. Her current interests are workforce education and training, safeguarding, trauma-informed and rights-based approaches to practice. So hello, Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Hi there, thanks so much, Alison, and thanks everyone for letting me come and take part this morning. The speakers so far have been very motivational for me, myself, so really reflecting already on some of those conversations. But as we continue the conversation this morning, focusing on the theme of reclaiming the social and social work and the importance of relationships, I'm going to talk to you about how the BASW Codes of Ethics are reflected within the SSC Codes of Practice and how the Regulator's Code of Practice can support social workers to practice in a way that helps you meet the aspirations of the BASW codes. So I'm going to begin with a quick reminder of the role and purpose of the two codes and how they interact. So the first slide is just a quick reminder, and I know members will be very familiar already, but just about the BASW Code of Ethics and how they're underpinned by those three key pillars of human rights, social justice and professional integrity. And within the codes, there are clear statements that set out the values and principles within these. Within the codes of practice for the regulator, and next slide please, I just wanted to do a quick reminder to say that the SSC codes set out the standards of practice and behaviour expected of everyone who works in social services in Scotland. So as we think this morning about those two codes and how they interact with each other, I thought it might be helpful just to start with that. Next slide please. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Laura, could we just ask you to turn your camera on?
Well, it should be on. Hang on. Is that working now? Is it on now for people?
Yes, that's fine. We should be able to spotlight you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as the beginning, I just wanted again just to quickly remind how the codes interact with each other. So abiding by the codes of practice is a condition of registration as a social worker, and setting out, as I said, the behaviours and values expected of them, and being registered allows social workers to practice. The BASW codes of ethics outline the values and aspirations which BASW believes should characterise social work, and members all sign up to the code, which is designed to make sure members and support members to act ethically. And there are several places where we can see where the two codes align and really complement each other. And we have new codes of practice which will be launched in May 2024, which we hope will further support social workers to practice ethically. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch briefly and give you a brief overview of the review of the codes, just to highlight to you where those changes are going to be before I go on to talk about how the BASW codes of ethics are reflected within the new codes of practice, which will come out next year. The last time the codes were reviewed was back in 2016, and obviously we've seen a number of additional groups come on the register. We've seen changes within the workforce, and there have been significant learning coming from national reviews, from policy developments, and from the development of new standards, which we really needed to take into account when thinking about how we revised the codes to make sure that they were reflecting current thinking. So some of the learning that we drew upon were around, for example, the Adult Social Care Review, the Feely Review, and it really reinforced the need to work together to promote and ensure human rights, well-being, and maintaining a focus on how we involve people in change and in decisions. The promise highlighted the importance of relationship, the impact of language, and the need to significantly declutter and streamline professional codes for the workforce, and the need to ensure a skilled, motivated, trauma-informed and resilient workforce. And the promise also set out a clear statement that fundamentally inspection and regulation needed to change and needed to think about the way and alter the way it regulates and supports the workforce, really focusing and prioritising on nurturing relationships and really shifting its accountability structures to allow workers to really value their relationships and the importance of cherishing relationships, and that regulators really need to take that into consideration when setting standards for practice and within our fitness to practice regimes. Other changes, just before we move on, were around the implementation of the health and social care standards, which really brought out that clear articulation around the value of kindness and compassion, and we wanted to make sure that was also reflected within the new codes. Next slide, please. So over the last 18 months, we've been working over the review of the codes, but over summer last year, we held a number of code conversation events and through different mechanisms to really hear from the sector and all key stakeholders what was working well in the codes, what needed to change, and what did they want to see in the new code. And the key changes that came out of that code design work were that the wording needed to change to reflect relationship-based practice, risk enablement, trauma-informed rights and asset-based approaches to practice. There was an ask for much more clearer, empowering language and a move away from deficit-based statements. And within the new code, for anyone who saw it as part of the consultation, there is now only one of the overarching codes that says anything to do with I will not. Everything is about I will and about how we support people to deliver and empower people to deliver their practice in a much more positive and empowering way. The codes also have a much clearer articulation now in terms of the value base and include the importance of kindness and compassion throughout the codes, and also highlight the importance of involving and strengthening the involvement of people in decision making. Within the codes, there was also a need for improvement around accountability, and that's both in terms of individuals and in the employers. And there was a big shift in terms of how we revised the language and moving away from outdated language and a change of terminology. So we've moved away from people who use services, and throughout the codes, we talk very much about individuals throughout the codes. And I know this aligns better with the code of ethics in terms of talking about people, individuals, groups, communities, and how that reflects the reality of the range of people. We're there to support everyone, not just people who are receiving services. Also, there were changes just about strengthening supervision, and I'll come back to that when we look at them, but there were also some key changes within the employers' codes about strengthening them, but also around the accountability and support we expect to see from employers in terms of supporting the workforce, particularly around supporting the workforce in terms of supervision support, but also around the importance of employers really supporting people to develop their practice. And in terms of supporting, in particular, there's a new code around those newly qualified social workers coming into practice and the particular responsibilities of employers in that space. Next slide, please. So we undertook formal consultation over this summer, and it was designed to test out whether the new codes as we've drafted them were easy and clear to understand, and whether the proposed changes were appropriate and reflected current practice. And we wanted to understand what the impact of the proposed changes would have for workers, employers and individuals. So we had over 500 people who responded, and it gave us some really good feedback and helped us revise the codes even further when we took into account some of what the impact might be in terms of some of the changes we had suggested. And it was good to see that over more than 80% felt the revisions really encouraged that good, strong value base around kindness, compassion. People felt it did support them in terms of risk enablement and safety and approaches to protection in terms of their practice, either well or very well. Next slide, please. And we also asked some questions regarding how did they feel about the codes overall now they'd been revised, and almost 90% agreed or strongly agreed that the new codes reflected the values that they needed to work in social services and reflected good practice, and over 85% agreed or strongly agreed that the codes were relevant to them and helped them set out and clear standards of practice for their own work. So I'll now take you through how we see those examples of alignment between the two codes, between both the Code of Ethics and the SSC new codes, basing it around those three pillars. So starting with human rights, obviously we can see here the clear value statement within the Code of Ethics around social work is based on respect for inherent worth and dignity of all people. And you can see here the close alignment between what is in the Codes of Ethics and the Codes of Practice. The wording reflecting relationship-based practice, risk enablement, much more empowering language and a much clearer articulation of that value base. But you can see here both codes set out a strong expectation that social workers uphold and promote dignity and rights of individuals, and to ensure that individuals are included and informed and can make informed choices about the care and support that they receive. So I think you can see here there is clear alignment, and that they really complement each other around the approaches to human rights. Next slide, please. When we're looking at the pillar of social justice and social workers having a responsibility to promote social justice in relation to people and to society as a whole, again, you can see within the SASW Code of Ethics and the SSC Codes of Practice, there is that clear commitment to respecting diversity and challenging both dangerous, abusive and discriminatory or oppressive practice. And again, I think you can see here, there's some real clear support and alignment there in terms of what we see in the Regulators Code and what the expectations are within the SASW Codes of Ethics. Next slide, please. In terms of professional integrity and social workers having the responsibility to respect and uphold values and principles of the profession and act in a reliable, honest and trustworthy manner, I think you can see here again, there is a really close throughout the codes and the various codes I've highlighted here, that the theme around strengthening professional accountability, but both again a clear focus around the importance of maintaining professional boundaries and about how we use responsibly the power that comes with our roles. And I've highlighted a couple of the new codes here as well around the importance of engaging in supervision and about how we maintain our own professional learning as part of that, and about how we remain professionally accountable. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I think you can see, hopefully from the revised new codes, that there is significant alignment in both the Codes of Practice and the SASW Codes of Ethics, and that they really do complement each other really well. The SSC codes can sometimes be seen as a tool for policing or for regulating the workforce, but I hope you can see that it can also be a tool for reflection and development and support you in your roles. Both codes offer a framework of support for social workers to practice in a way where relationships are central and are key, and they aim to empower you to uphold and promote the dignity and rights of individuals. They reflect the strong value base that you all hold and reflect the importance of reclaiming the social and social work if we are to meet the standards of practice that you have all signed up and are committed to delivering. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. And I can see there's a couple of questions. There's one coming in. We'll maybe come to it when we have the panel, but around how the work that SSC is doing, how that fits with the National Social Work Agency. But leading on, we're slightly behind time, so we'll try and catch up. I do want to ask the panel a few questions from the chat at the end of Iona's input here. So Iona, welcome. Iona's the Chief Social Work Advisor in Scottish Government. She's worked with government since 2017 after more than 30 years. That's a life sentence, working in local government, the NHS. She's done lots of roles: Director of Health and Social Care, Chief Officer of an IJB, Director of Social Work and Chief Social Work in North Ayrshire. So Iona, welcome.
Thank you, Alison. And I won't speak too fast, but I'll try and move through quickly, will I? Is that the instruction? Good morning, colleagues. It's really good to be here, and what a fantastic conference. So many great speakers and such a great contribution from Katrina. Something certainly for all of us to reflect on. So I'm going to do the probably boring bit here, but I want to talk about how we can change the system within which we work, and that's come across from a number of speakers. And I think Toyin said at the very beginning, actually, that it's great to talk about how we can improve our professional practice and everything else, but if the environment does not support you to do that, then it is incredibly difficult. So this slide here is not really a slide for you guys, because you know this. This is what we do. This is the day in, day out job of social workers. And it's been really important to have this slide, because in our conversations with everybody else, so with ministers, and you heard the Cabinet Secretary today, she knows well, she is a social worker, but with others within government, and also with the chief execs of the councils, with the chief execs of the health boards, with the IJB chief officers, it's been really important to emphasise what social workers do on a day-to-day basis. And the key point is that we work within a legal framework, including human rights, and that often you need to be the voice of those rights, and you need to be the people who uphold those rights. And I know that particularly during the pandemic, and now during this recession and the cost of living crisis, that's really difficult and really challenging given the current situation in which you are practicing. But to be honest, what we do on a day-to-day basis is not understood well. And that's one of the issues that really we need to sort out, guys, between us. And one of the things we're doing through the development of the National Social Work Agency, which I will come on to talk about a bit more, is looking at how we improve our profile and how we get what we do more widely understood. And what is our vision for social work for the future? And that work's been led by Frank from SASW, not on his own, with all of us there, but it's a piece of work that I would encourage you all to get involved with in the future. But it's really important. Don't think that others understand what they do, what we do. They don't. And it's been really important. And it's actually been really important to have a Cabinet Secretary who understands what social work does, and where social work is now regularly discussed at Cabinet and elsewhere within the political arena within Scotland. So my next slide. Thanks. Could I have the next slide? Seem to be stuck somewhere in terms of slides. Alison, can you hear me?
Yes, Iona. Hang on. I've tried to move it forward, but I don't know if it just moves forward for me. I can see a slide now called Workforce Pressures.
Got it. Got it. It's okay. Oh no, it's disappeared altogether. Let me just, I don't know what happened there. Okay, hopefully the slides will reappear. What I want to talk about is workforce pressures. Now, you all know this is better than me because you're working in it. And you'll probably think this isn't rocket science. We all know this about the workforce, but to be honest, we know more now about what's happening within the workforce than we ever have before. And I'm not saying that makes it great, because it doesn't, but one of the key issues here is in Scotland, we haven't actually had a workforce plan that tries to match the needs coming through our communities with the workforce we require in order to deliver it. It's a complicated picture. We've got 32 local government employers, each of whom do things slightly differently and in their own way. And we've got many third sector employers employing social workers and paraprofessional staff. The recent developments, particularly the SSC's vacancy report, which was delivered at the end of October there, has really given us a clear picture of what's going on. So we know there's ongoing and increasing demand. We know that complexity is an issue, particularly in childcare, but not only in childcare, and that what you're dealing with are really complicated situations. But we also know that now almost, and in fact now Glasgow too, are saying every local authority across Scotland is facing a recruitment challenge. We have seen that from the work that SSC have done, that the vacancy rate, the average vacancy rate is 11.8%. But colleagues, that varies from team to team. And in some parts of Scotland, some teams are looking at 40 to 50% vacancies, with newly qualified social workers making up the vast majority of teams. So we're in a really difficult and precarious position. That we are seeing a move of social workers from childcare and children and family services over to adult care and to justice, but every area has a shortage. The position in childcare is particularly concerning. That despite the investment that we've put into mental health officer training, we only managed to grow an extra 4 mental health officers in the last couple of years. So a huge challenge given the rising demand in relation to MHO work, both in terms of adults with incapacity, in terms of adults with incapacity and the Mental Health Act. And overall, we're seeing a decrease in the number of practicing social workers. So we face a really difficult situation. And as you know, the problem with that is, and particularly in those pressurised teams, is for those who are left behind who are still in those teams, the pressure is immense. And the pressure to prioritise and to move on to the next case and to increase caseloads is also immense. And that makes it really difficult to practice. And it makes it really difficult in terms of managing what are already very complex situations. And the box there tells you basically the impact of that. I don't need to tell you that. You all know that. And we know from the work that's been done with SASW and Social Work Scotland and others, particularly around the setting the bar report, the impact that's having, that many social workers are choosing to leave the workforce in a relatively short space of time. Next slide, thanks. Oh. Yay, we've managed. And our students, to come to our students, basically our students don't have a level playing field in Scotland. I'm not saying it's great for any students, but it's particularly difficult for social work students. Don't have, if you look at, for example, the support that's given to nursing students and other students, social workers are nowhere near that. So we have been working very hard around the student issue, as have SASW and others. And we know now, particularly, we've got a much better, clearer picture of what's happening with our students. And we know what we need to do in terms of looking at new routes into social work. And how we improve the situation for our students. The minute the Cabinet Secretary announced the extension of SAS funding for postgraduate students, it's not going to change things overnight, but it's a step in the right direction, and we are looking at what else we can do. And as the Cabinet Secretary said, one of the main issues that we have with our students is the practice placement challenges. And under half, I think in fact it was only 30% of those who graduated this year have had local authority social work experience. Now, that's really difficult for them, because when they're going for interviews, they feel that they are disadvantaged because they haven't had that local authority social work experience, and it's difficult when they do get jobs because they haven't had that experience. Also, we know, because student poverty is an issue, that they're having to take on work, and that they're having to work throughout their placements and in terms of their course. So we know all of this now much better than we ever have before. Next slide, thanks. And challenges in the social work profession. I guess you all know this. The national leadership is an issue, particularly, and that's been highlighted recently by justice social workers who don't really see themselves at times reflected in some of the national leadership. But it's also an impact of a system which is fragmented across children and families, justice, and health and social care. I mean, clear social workers have told us very clearly that the current landscape is not acceptable, that they find it difficult to work in, and that the impact of integrated services, for example, is not always positive. Some have found it positive, many have found it negative. And one of the issues is lack of clear influence of social workers and a clear vision and a profile of the social workers. So significant issues for us there, as well as all the other issues that we have in terms of recruitment, retention, and the challenges that we have in terms of, I guess, almost every improvement resource having been stripped out of teams as well. So very significant in terms of what we're doing, and the statutory duties continue to increase. And I know that that's an issue. Now, if anybody's, I know that all of you know this, but I think the piece of work that's really demonstrated it very clearly is the Strand 4 of the SASW report. If you haven't read it, have a look at it. It very clearly, 1,400 staff were interviewed for that piece of work. They either completed a survey or they completed an interview or a focus group. It's not only social workers, there's social care workers, there's teachers, there's health workers, and others in there. But what it shows very clearly is a very fragmented landscape with resource issues throughout, and a lack of clarity. So I would recommend it as a read. It's 140 pages long, but start with the discussion chapter, and then you can pick out the bits that really interest you. But for me, if anything, that actually says to us in Scottish Government, and it is critical of us in Scottish Government, it says to COSLA as the employers, and it says to all of us as professional leaders that we need to sort this out, and that is not acceptable. And ministers have been looking very closely at the work that SASW have produced. Next slide, thanks. So, social workers matter. You all know that. You are social workers. It's not news to you. But as I said, a lot of the work we're doing is basically showing that many others don't understand what we do. They don't understand why it's important, and they don't understand why an investment in social work is actually an investment in communities. And we have had to draw that to people's attention and to draw the links for them. And I think what we need to do now, and the National Social Work Agency and the run up to, it's not like let's all sit back and wait for the National Social Work Agency. It's about what we're doing now as we move towards a National Social Work Agency. We need to create the conditions which allow social workers to do what you are trained to do. And if any of us are under any illusion that what we do doesn't matter, I think we've heard from Katrina today. But also last week I had the good fortune to meet a group of young people with learning disabilities, a really interesting group called Include for Good as part of the social the Council for Learning Disability, who are employed by the Council for Learning Disability as social rapporteurs. And I met with them in Govan last week. And the first question they asked me, they put on a presentation for me and told me their story. The first question they asked me was, how can I get my human rights? The next question they asked me was, these are not easy questions, was why is there such variation? Because they're a group from across the country. And why, if I live in Perth, do I not get this? But if I live in, let me think, no, Perth is with Falkirk, I can get things. And if I live in Edinburgh, I'm on the waiting list. So they were really passionate about it. It really mattered to them clearly. And what they were saying was, why do we not get lifelong support? Or some of us get lifelong support and others do not get lifelong support. And that all that we want is the same as everybody else, a home, a job or education. And they shared their stories, which I was very privileged to hear the story. But I guess for one of the stories was very much about a young woman who was living in a care home, had suffered this very significant trauma, and thankfully somebody in the care home contacted social work and brought a social worker in. And that young woman spoke for 10 minutes about the difference that her social worker had made to her in her life, and the difference in how she felt, that there was a new plan to get her out of the care home, to get her into her own tenancy, but that she felt she had somebody on her side and somebody she could alert if things were going wrong. So very clear. And then they were all saying basically what we all want is we all want a social worker. So let's not forget the difference that good social work can make to people's lives. Next slide, thanks. So what are we doing now? Basically, so we're working with COSLA as the representatives of the employers, and we're working with SASW and Social Work Scotland together to look at what needs to be done now. And I wish I had a magic wand and I wish I had mega millions of pounds, but we don't have mega millions of pounds. We do need more money, and I'll certainly never find a magic wand. So at the moment, what we're looking at is how do we expand the routes into social work, and we're working to look at the graduate apprenticeship. We're looking at increased capacity with distance learning, and we're looking at reviewing the support available to postgraduate students. The Cabinet Secretary said a bit about that today. That's not the end of the story. And we are looking at how we enhance practice learning so that all of our students can get the experience within a local authority, because that experience is not the only experience they need, but it's really important that they get access to that. We have established for some years now a social work education partnership with all the HEIs who teach social work. There's 9 of them who teach social work across Scotland. We have invested money into national and regional infrastructure to support social work education, and that's about enhancing the experience of our students and persuading employers to provide practice placements. And we're looking just now to see how we can improve and support the funding of practice placements so students from all backgrounds, particularly those from more economically challenged backgrounds, can actually train and become social workers. We've developed a strategic framework from qualifying education to advanced practice for all social workers, and thank you to all of you, the 300 or 400 of you who came along and contributed to that strategic framework, and it has been put together just now. But the proposal is that we move from the degree, so when social workers have become newly qualified, that we look at how they're supported in their first year of practice, right through to developing an advanced practice framework for those of you who want to be mental health officers or to do the SCIM training or to take on advanced practice in justice. So that's work that's in phase just now. And finally, we have launched our trauma responsive social work services. And Kirsty Pate's actually on this call, who leads that team. But that's a team of social workers who are offering training and support and trauma-informed training and support across Scotland. We've seen 300 newly qualified social workers come through that short training programme in the last couple of months. Very well received, 96% approval by the social workers. But we need to do more. 4 areas have just been told that they are going to be funded to be supported to roll out system-wide look at trauma-informed practice, which includes not just how practitioners do their job, but how practitioners are supported to do their job, and how the system and within which they work can support them to be enhanced trauma practitioners. So that work's underway now. The 4 areas will begin at the start at the beginning of next year, and then they will roll out to other areas in Scotland. It's just the start of a programme. So those are the things that are going on just now. We are looking at any other, and if you have ideas about things that you think could happen relatively quickly and easily, then please contribute them. We're always open to new ideas. And next slide, thanks. Finally, I think, yeah, more or less, the National Social Work Agency. We know that what we're doing just now is not enough. You heard Miss Constance talk about the National Social Work Agency and the ministerial commitment to it. This is a partnership. This is not a national agency that tells every area what they need to do. This is a partnership with local areas, local government and third sector colleagues that looks at what can be done locally, what can be supported locally, what needs to be done on a regional basis. So, for example, the Highlands and Islands have particular challenges, and we're working with them to look at what might happen, we might be able to develop for the Highlands and Islands, and what does need to happen on a national basis. We have now agreed with COSLA and the local government agencies, basically through approval at their leadership group last week, that this work will go forward now, and there's a next phase of work to do to deliver the detail of the work. And we're looking for everybody to be involved in the detail of the work as we move forward. So it's a partnership, colleagues. It's a partnership particularly with SASW, Social Work Scotland and COSLA. We are proposing that the National Social Work Agency will have an overview of policy that affects social work. So this whole issue that we have just now of many different policy initiatives being generated, many of them within Scottish Government, and with not a view of what that means for the profession. So we need to be able to respond to that. We need to be able to have a workforce plan that begins to look at need and assesses what we need in order in terms of a workforce to deliver. And we need to also think about how to support that workforce to implement new policy and new guidance. And so with Social Work Scotland particularly, we would have a joint team which will look at implementation of new practice and new policy as well. So that's the 3 strands really that the National Social Work Agency will work around in terms of the profession. And I've already outlined the other things that are going on in terms of the advanced practice framework and developing standards. And I think the standards issue is important. But really what we need to do is ensure that this agency empowers social workers. So I would encourage all of you to get involved through SASW, through any other organisations that you are currently involved with, and we will make available the details of how you get involved and make sure that your voice is heard in the next iteration of the National Social Work Agency, which is there to make sure that we have a pipeline of social workers, but also to train and support our leaders for the future. And my last slide is just to say, basically, thank you, first of all, for everything you do every day. But thank you for your time today, and thank you very much for everything that you do for the people of Scotland. And there's the details there around how to get involved in the Social Work Policy Panel, and I'm sure we can put that in the chat. Thanks, Alison.
Thanks so much, Iona.